Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are across the US. Thank you so much for joining us for this really important conversation and a continuation of our ongoing Freedom Requires Action series. This is a series that's really focused on policy, where we're going in the United States, whether it's at the federal level or the local or state levels, to really talk about where do we need to go, what policies need to be enacted, what legislation needs to be introduced so that we can more effectively combat human trafficking, that we can serve survivors with excellence, and we can hold offenders accountable. I'm really excited about today's conversation. This is really an issue that I believe is transformative. From being in the space for, I'm almost ashamed to say, 2 decades, it shows my age, but this is something that we've been talking about for many years now, and that is the issue of criminal record relief. We have seen some states start to implement criminal record relief in various different forms. Some have been a little more comprehensive than others. Some states have left a little to be desired in their approaches to criminal record relief. But this year is particularly exciting for us because we have a bill that has been introduced at the federal level, the Trafficking Survivors Relief Act. And so this is really exciting. I believe this is truly a transformative time in our fight against human trafficking, because it's something that's really going to help those survivors overcome systemic barriers to to autonomy, things that we have seen continue to put up roadblocks when honestly we should be out leading out in front and making sure that survivors have access to not just services, but to full reintegration into the community and access to economic opportunities, housing opportunities, all those things that honestly sometimes we take for granted. But so I am really thankful for the incredible panel that we have with us today. Annie Barletta is the legislative director for Representative Fry out of South Carolina, and who has really been leading on coordination of this key piece of legislation. And I'm going to turn it over to her in just a second to really introduce this bill much more appropriately. We have Meg Kelsey, who's the assistant director for the Center for Global Justice and an adjunct clinical professor at Regent University School of Law. She graduated with honors from the University of Pennsylvania, where she studied Hispanic studies and political science, lived in Buenos Aires for several years, playing professional soccer and teaching English and elementary school. Meg graduated with honors from the University of Miami School of Law before working as assistant Commonwealth's attorney in Virginia. For those of you who don't live in Virginia, that's Virginia's unique way of saying a prosecutor. Um, After practicing criminal and civil law for 10 years, Meg joined the Center for Global Justice, where she helps direct research and initiatives that promote human rights and rule of law. And I'll just mention, we get to Meg, I'm really thankful for her to be here, both as just to give us the legal perspective, but also as a practitioner. Just recently, I had the great honor of reaching out to her and asking her to engage with a survivor that I had worked with many years ago when I was still a detective. And she was able to jump in and support that process. And I know that's ongoing, but really thankful for that. Olivia Raposa is a survivor leader with over a decade of firsthand experience. She has a dedicated focus spanning more than 5 years, collaborating closely with anti-human trafficking nonprofits, legal entities, government agencies to combat sex and labor trafficking. Her mission involves empowering fellow survivors and providing crucial insights to legislators and law enforcement, shedding light on the challenges survivors face with criminal records. Olivia, thank you so much for being here with us and just sharing your experiences. And thank you for your commitment to stay in this space. I know that it takes a lot to really continue to give back, and you do that on a daily basis, and we're really encouraged by that. And last but certainly not least is Liz Emling, who is the CEO and founder of Free Forever Letitia's House. She's a dedicated professional with over 17 years of unwavering commitment to supporting and empowering women who are at risk or have been victims of sexual exploitation. Her extensive experience spans various roles, all aimed at combating human trafficking and providing essential services to survivors. She's certainly a key figure in the fight against sexual exploitation and actively collaborates today with law enforcement agencies participating in operations to bring perpetrators to justice. She maintains close partnerships with victim advocates from prominent organizations such as Homeland Security, FBI, local law enforcement at the state level, the Attorney General's office, and is currently operating in 2 states with restorative care services. I can tell you from a very personal level, having observed the work that Liz and her team has been doing, I've had a very inside look over the past several months, and it's just incredible. They have a passion for this. And what I think is so unique and why I'm so thankful is for you being here today is that the population that they serve in particular are those survivors that other programs say, you know what, your case is just too complicated. And Letitia's House opens their doors and helps them navigate and has seen firsthand the very real barriers that a lot of these survivors face. So I'm very excited to have you here and to hear your perspective as well. But I want to start with Annie and hoping that you can just really introduce us more formally to the Trafficking Survivors Relief Act. What is it? Why did your boss decide to introduce it? And what do we hope it's going to really do?
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. Thanks for having us all here today. As Bill said, I'm Annie Barlett. I'm Congressman Fry's Legislative Director. So, in January of this year, we are happy to introduce the Trafficking Survivors Relief Act. And so, in a nutshell, this bill would provide federal criminal record relief to survivors of human trafficking who committed an offense as a direct result of being a victim of human trafficking. So, a lot of times we've heard in our talks with survivors that people who are in trafficking situations, a lot of times have to commit crimes due to their trafficking victimization. And this can be from drug offenses, financial crimes, identity theft, tax evasion, things that like assist the trafficker's scheme. And unfortunately, this a lot of time leads to victims being arrested, detained, convicted, and even incarcerated, therefore having a criminal record. And so there's a lot of state level laws that exist right now that will help provide relief for state level crimes. And however, so there was a gap at the federal level. And so we were able to introduce this bill to try to get federal criminal record relief and also set the tone for states as well to have something at the state level. Having a federal criminal record, people if they have a felony offense, they can't rent an apartment, they can't get a job, they can't volunteer at their kids' schools. And so it's a big barrier for something that they truly committed out of duress. And this legislation, you have to show by preponderance of the evidence that the offense was committed as a direct result of being a victim of human trafficking. And so, with that, we really view this bill as very common sense. It's bipartisan. It really allows people to have a new lease on life. And we are happy to be supported by so many organizations in this effort. We've had an outpouring of success from the trafficking community. So, that has been really awesome. So, my boss, this is his first term in Congress. He previously served in the South Carolina state legislature, where he really helped with some trafficking legislation at that level in South Carolina and helped increase like better South Carolina's human trafficking laws. So when he came up here to Congress, this was something that we really wanted to try to continue on. And so this is a good avenue to really make a difference, I think. So we actually introduced this bill, a great joint introduction with Congressman Ted Lieu from California, Ann Wagner from Missouri, and Robert Garcia from California. And we have 23 co-sponsors on the bill right now, which is really awesome. We're just really trying to build that support as well, to try to hopefully push this through the Judiciary Committee and then get a floor on the House, or get a vote on the House floor. Really exciting that actually this week Senator Rubio and Senator Gillibrand are introducing a companion in the Senate. So that's really awesome. We're really happy to be working with them and partner in this effort. So with that, I think that's everything I have for you guys here. So I'll turn it back to you, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. And Gosh, what a way to start his first term in Congress with a piece of legislation like this. Super, super transformative. So please let him know how much we appreciate, quite honestly, just his courage to step up and tackle this very challenging issue. We talk about some of the legal challenges, and Meg, you've now, as a professor of law, but also as a former prosecutor and still a practitioner in this space, supporting survivors through that vacature and expungement process. Can you talk a little bit about why is this even necessary? Some people who may not be really in tune with kind of what's happening in the trafficking space may say, of course they're survivors. Why would we even need this process? Could you talk a little bit about why we need it and what are some of the legal challenges that have prevented survivors from seeking relief before laws like TSRA?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. As you mentioned, I was a prosecutor here, assistant Commonwealth attorney or district attorney as known in other states for a number of years, and actually handled these petitions, similar petitions in Virginia before the vacatur law was passed in 2021. And so I joined Regent about 2 years ago, and we had wanted to start a clinic to take our own cases and represent survivors in some manner. And things lined up to we identified this bill that had been passed in 2021 in Virginia. I will say Virginia was one of the last states to have any kind of record relief passed. We were one of six at the time that did not have any record relief passed. I think there are maybe three remaining states without any kind of vacatur, expungement, or sealing available. So Virginia was somewhat behind. And then as we looked at petitions connected to this law, realized not a single petition had been filed in the 2 years since the law had been passed. So we saw a gap here. And in looking at that, I had the perspective of having been a prosecutor and knowing part of the issue is the overload on the legal system. And there's such a high premium placed on quick resolution of cases. And so a problem at the front end is often attorneys, prosecutors, the court system cannot take a deep dive and look at each case as closely as the victims need. And so often the survivors are swept up with the accused and become the accused in the system. As a prosecutor, I remember at any given time, I could have 100 open cases. And as you can imagine, not each case gets the close look that it deserves and that we see the victims deserve as well. So that's a problem at the front end. And then as the cases are quickly resolved, because there is this pressure to resolve cases, and even a legal concept of finality, we want disputes to be resolved. And we don't want cases to go on into perpetuity. I think there's acknowledgement of that. And so we want the stability of finality. But the issue comes when that finality, that resolution is incorrect. And so at this point, it is a shift in the tide, the legal thinking of actually, we need to change some of these final resolutions because they were incorrect in how they were resolved. And so that is resistance we see, even just in the legal realm, because it goes against the desire for finality. And so it's important to understand the resistance, the hesitance, in order to be able to address it. Yes, we acknowledge there should be finality. However, we need to correct the wrongs. And so that's a legal pushback we've found. And when I was researching to start up our clinic, the clinic's only been operating about a year. I researched and read all the statistics about challenges that survivors face because of a criminal record, that their first contacts with the legal system are negative. They are seen as the criminal. And so that's a huge barrier to re-engage with a system that has wronged them. The legal system, in theory, is supposed to promote justice and prevent injustice, and it's done the opposite in the lives of these survivors. So that's a huge barrier emotionally, psychologically, and also reading statistics that we have come to see as true, that these criminal records are absolutely a barrier to housing and jobs, custody. We had one survivor who she wasn't even convicted of prostitution. It was a charge on her record, and yet it was coming up in the custody battle, which is wrong on so many levels. But we see this has pervasive effects on their lives, and they cannot reintegrate into society because of the record. And so we saw the clinic as a way to meet those needs and face some of these barriers head on, specifically from the legal lane and with the legal perspective, offering pro bono service. And we'll get to hear from Olivia, but I'm so glad she's on this panel because she was the first client who was brave enough to work with this clinic that was starting out. And she very much was a pioneer in helping us figure out, how do we navigate these petitions? How do we approach this and win a case?
That certainly teased that up very nicely to kick it over to Olivia. Olivia, your journey from survivor to advocate to leader in this space really is quite inspiring. And I just want to thank you again for doing that. And just coming off the heels of what Meg was saying, could you share a little bit about that journey? What that looked like? And from your perspective, I know you work with other survivors today in helping them navigate this space. What does it really mean to be able to have the opportunity to get criminal record relief from your unique perspective?
So thank you. I appreciate you having me here as well. In all transparency, it's difficult because just like Meg said, you're trying to put yourself back into trusting a system that has let you down on multiple occasions, different times, different ways. And it's also can be extremely triggering because there are processes of the vacature that are included in what happens when you're arrested. You have to go get refingerprinted. You have to relive exactly what happened to you and tell and explain. And it's hard too because not fortunately, but fortunately for me, I am a certified trafficking victim, so it made it a lot easier for our petition. But there are survivors out there that have no way of proving that they've ever actually been trafficked and still have these criminal records. So it's it's a huge step that this law got passed in any aspect in 21. So I'm grateful for that, but I'm also on the fence of it's hard because, as Annie and Meg mentioned, felony charges, sometimes federal charges come along, and the only ones that they are acknowledging at this moment are misdemeanors. So yes, fortunately, some of my most embarrassing charges have been expunged and taken off with vacature, but I think that there's like such like a broader horizon for survivors to be able to get back into society successfully and stay successfully. So it's a bittersweet kind of thing, but I was definitely happy when the Center for Global Justice reached out and said that they were willing to help me get vacature. And it was a process because they'd never done it before. I'd never done it before. And I was grateful for all of their trauma-informed care that they took, the steps they took, the way they explained it to me, and being able to ask my advice, how I took things personally. So I think that it's definitely a learning block, and I look forward to working more closely with Center for Global Justice too to help other survivors navigate that as well, because it's not always the easiest process. And I think that having another survivor to be able to walk them through some of those harder triggering steps will make it easier or less triggering for them.
Yeah, there's the sort of cliche phrase of being a trailblazer, right? But somebody's got to go first. And I want to thank you for being that one to go first in this space, to really be able to shed light on where we are. We know that the legislative process, the evolution of our efforts to combat human trafficking are just that, right? It is evolutionary, and we learn from what's working, what's not working. But I'm really so encouraged to see like Congress stepping in now, because we know that so many states will then look to Congress as that model, right? What should we be doing at the state level? So the federal legislation, of course, will cover federal violations and federal criminal records, right? But then we've got the states that then need to make sure that they're following suit and implementing similar policies. Olivia, your story is, it's great. We're just so thankful that you're here. But sometimes I think, and I hope this doesn't come out the wrong way, sometimes it's hard to say that yours is not a unique story. There's so many other survivors that are experiencing that. And Liz, in your work at Free Forever, you're serving those survivors. You are working with them as they're exiting exploitation, supporting them during that process, and then helping them to try to reintegrate back into society, to become autonomous. Could you talk a little bit about the challenges that you see in working with these survivors that criminal records bring? What does it prevent them from doing when they're ready to leave your program?
I'd say the two biggest challenges, aside from the time constraints the courts put on, because 99% of the women who come to our houses are moms. So oftentimes they've been arrested, their kids are in foster care, they have a very limited amount of time to get their life together. That may mean going to rehab. That means getting a job or getting your GED. We have people who don't have a high school diploma. So there are a lot of barriers, but you add felony convictions on top of that. And honestly, they come, and oftentimes people have been trafficked for a long period of time. And so they don't know what they want to be when they grow up. And they literally have no idea of what they're going to be good at or what they can do. So felony convictions are very limiting, especially. So for us, we have had women at our house in a very quick amount of time, not because we're imposing it, but because the courts impose it or the state imposes it. It's coming from outside the system, says, get your life together in 12 months. And if you don't, we're going to sever your rights. And if you don't, blah, blah, blah. So it's very tough. So women at our house, we pay for culinary school. We pay for college. We pay for trade school. We work with volunteers to help people get their GED. We pay for out-of-state tuition in Utah with different partners that we have. So we have women who are in school for psychology, because you can become a psychologist and have felonies. We have women who become chefs. We've had lots of chefs graduate from our house. We have women becoming entrepreneurs because honestly, there's not a lot that they can do, and it's really tough. We're working with someone right now who's helping women start their own businesses, because sometimes that's really all that you can do. The barriers with felonies are housing as well. If you have a felony conviction, and we have referrals from all over the country, we're national, you cannot get an apartment. We have a partner, and he rents houses, and I said, if I have a survivor that has 5 kids and she needs a 3-bedroom apartment and her credit score is 425 because she's been in credit scores suck, and she has 5 felony convictions because she had drug paraphernalia in her pocket, will you rent to her? And he's a graduate of Regent. When I first met him, he said no. And now he said yes, because we stared at each other across a cup of coffee. And I said, yes, you will rent to her. Yes. We have women going to school to become paralegals because we discovered, because women have been in jail for 7 years and they'll say, I didn't have representation and I went to the law library. Praise God. If you can study law, you can't become a lawyer, but you want to be a paralegal and help someone, you can do that with a felony conviction. So I call my lawyer friends. We have lawyer friends in Florida, DC, Virginia, and I say, will you hire her? And I'm going to hunt you down if you don't hire her. I didn't say that. I'm going to say you have to hire her, please. I didn't say that. Oh God, we're live. Oh no. Anyway, it's just compelling. But my God, because if you have 5 kids and you have a year and you go to school and you have your legal aid degree and nobody will hire you, you can't get a house. So it's a huge challenge. Letitia's house is 11 years. I've been in the space 17 years. 100% of our residents have mostly felonies, and only 1 girl was charged with prostitution. Housing and jobs are the biggest issue. We have 1 young lady now, and she's been with us 2 years. She's graduating in May. She lost her kids. She cries about that when she talks about it. She applied for 100 jobs in Virginia, and the only place that would hire her was Five Guys.
Yeah.
She applied 100 times. She came home weeping because nobody would even give her a chance. But she will testify that she's different and she's not defined by her past. And she's going home and she's going to walk down the street, stare down the drug dealer. She said, I'm not defined by my past. She still has the felonies, but she's different. And it's just hard. Housing, kids, felonies, it's all hard.
Yeah, you talked a lot about work, and that's a big barrier, but we all have a lot of work to do as well. And I know, Annie, you've got to get back to work here in a second, but I wonder if you could just talk to us briefly about what is it that we can do to support this process? So often, those of us that are working on the field, in the field, I think we don't really realize how impactful our voice can be with various representatives and senators. What work can we be doing to make sure TSRA gets past this Congress?
Sure. No, thanks. It's a great question. This Congress, my boss, we are full steam ahead, really want this process to be successful this year. Our ask to you guys, reach out to your congressmen, your senators, really your congressmen right now for us on the House side, and ask them to co-sponsor this bill. If you can just reach out to like their legislative director or their person that handles judiciary, and I know I can send this to Bill if you guys don't have this, but we have a one pager on the bill. You can send a link on congress.gov to what the bill, where the bill is, and they can see who has co-sponsored it already. But the more co-sponsors that we have, the more likely that the Judiciary Committee is going to say, okay, we're feeling the pressure. Let's try to get this bill marked up, is what we say, which is basically this procedural thing that we have to do in order for it to get to a vote on the House floor. I think I've told many people this is probably one of I've worked on the Hill for like over 6 years, and this is probably one of the most impactful pieces of legislation that I've worked on. And so you guys know right now, you can see what's going on in the news. We are very divided up here. It is so hard to get anything done. This bill really is like a bright spot in the Congress. I think there is an opportunity. Democrats and Republicans agree on this. And so I think we should capitalize on that. And just the more momentum that we can getting everyone on the Judiciary Committee on, outreach to all those members, outreach to members across the aisle, across the board, across the country, and ask for their support would go a long way.
Amazing. Yeah, I think it truly does serve as a beacon of hope, not just for the field of human trafficking, but just to see the bipartisanship around this issue and this bill in particular. People that are very vocal on their particular ideological divide are coming together on this. And so just really encouraged by that. For those of you that are on this webinar, you will be receiving a follow-up email with some advocacy tools. So that one pager that Annie talked about, and just some very clear directions on how you can reach out to your representatives and take action to let them know you want them to co-sponsor this. You want them to be pushing for it to get to markup through committee and then on to the House floor. And you just really appreciate that. And again, as you go back to work, as you see your boss, please pass along our just extreme gratitude for coming out of the gate fighting. This is just incredible. And we look forward to partnering with him and all the members of Congress in the future to continue to advance this cause. So really appreciate you and his leadership on this. Meg, Elizabeth was talking earlier about how I'm not going to say that she bullied an attorney from Regent, but she educated an attorney on why this is important. Given your role as a law professor and practitioner, how do you incorporate your real world experiences into educating the future legal professionals, particularly about the complexities of human trafficking? Because this is, hopefully you would agree with me, it's a unique skill set to be able to work in this space. And why is that important? The work that you're doing as a practitioner is invaluable. The work that you've done as a prosecutor, invaluable. But I also think that as an educator of the next generation, it's invaluable for the future and where we go. Could you talk a little bit about that and what you do to help convince those Regent Law School future graduates that this is where they need to be focusing?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Liz. As attorneys, we're supposed to zealously advocate for our clients. And so you are just zealous, nothing more, nothing less. And I respect that about you. I think we all do. And yeah, practicing in this area, it was interesting. I've taught a course this semester tying in the work of the clinic and trying to communicate to the law students. We want to raise up law students who are excellent practitioners, but also whys and how things really work and how to engage clients, particularly aware of trauma and as trauma-informed counselors, which thankfully is a growing focus within the legal industry. Just being aware of trauma, acknowledging it, that it exists, and that we all suffer from a form of vicarious trauma through practicing law, particularly just hearing stories of our clients. And lawyers even have higher substance abuse rates and suicide rates than most adults. And thankfully, not thankfully with that, but because of awareness of those statistics, this is coming to the forefront in the legal profession, and combining that awareness with this work specifically with trafficking victims, observing in the face of evil and the trauma of the stories we're observing. That's a big part of the course and the education. What is trauma and what is vicarious trauma? And bringing in experts, really, when our course brought in 2 practitioners from the Children's Hospital here in Southern Virginia, CHKD, brought in a counselor who's worked extensively with survivors to speak to even the biology of it. How does trauma impact memory? And that,
Meg, I don't mean to cut you off, but real quick, could you explain what CHKD is? I think it's something that's unique that many people may not know.
yeah, Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters is a state-of-the-art facility here it's in Norfolk, Virginia, and they have what's called a child advocacy center run by professionals who have been in this work for over 10 years, really were pioneers in this area of communicating the children coming in. This is not just regular domestic abuse. There is more to this trauma and more to what the children have endured. And so they have been on the front lines of even educating our court system and pushing for awareness within specialty dockets. And so CHKD is a huge gift to this area and a huge resource, and happy to put in contact information for those on this call as well. I highly recommend anyone who works with juveniles to look at their best practices, particularly with screening and how to identify juveniles. As we know, many victims don't self-identify as a victim. So many of us, survivors and others, have this kind of false picture of what trafficking is, of it's the abduction, the shipping container from abroad, where so much of what probably all the people on this call we recognize, that's the stranger abduction is less than 1% of trafficking happening in the States. And so we have to adjust even how we screen and identify. And so CHKD has been on the forerunners in that, increasing awareness, how to screen, how to identify, and how to treat, just coordinating care. What care do survivors need? So they've been an incredible partner, even training our team. So bringing them in to speak with my students, who will then practice, some directly in this area of law, some not. But as humans, we are engaging with other humans. This is probably something we can all grow in, of understanding trauma. And we don't know everyone's story. We don't know the depths of it. And to just be a compassionate individual. And so that's such an important level, to not just knowing the statute, not just knowing how the court systems work, but how to engage with others. And there are practical complications with working with survivors, just in terms of being able to engage and draw out a linear timeline of a story. Because with these petitions, as Olivia was referring to, we have to basically write out and present to the court a timeline of their story, which is the worst part of anyone's life. And recognizing that's difficult, even just to write down and process with the survivor. And sometimes that takes time, and often the memories don't come up linearly. And so just even having patience in those kind of interviews from the perspective of counsel. And I can share more about that, but I did see a question about debt relief. And that's been a natural progression in our clinic, the clinic work we're doing. There was a law passed federally, the Debt Bondage Repair Act, passed in 2021, which does allow survivors to have certain items from their credit report blocked. And it involves petitioning the different credit agencies and then presenting evidence to show that you were a victim of trafficking. And so we just went through that process, had some hiccups, but we did the Debt Bondage Repair Act petition after the vacatur petition, because once the vacatur petition was granted, we had a document from the court saying, yes, this person is a trafficking victim. So we just used that as evidence in the debt bondage repair process. So I'm happy to share more about that, but I saw that question.
Awesome. Thank you. And thinking through this theme of education and working alongside other people, Olivia, you are the CEO and founder of the Surviving Change Foundation. And part of your work there is really collaborating closely with legal entities, with government agencies, other NGOs. Can you talk a little bit about how these collaborations are better enhancing support for that expungement and vacatur process? And why is education and collaboration so important in this space with professionals?
Absolutely. So it can be cumbersome coordinating with all these different agencies involved in expungement. It's hard getting your criminal record for some who are not part of a trafficking investigation and testified against their trafficker. It's hard proving that trafficking happened at all. So let alone when the crime you were accused of occurred, and then for me, you have to do that in every state that you had been trafficked in. So for me, I started being trafficked in Massachusetts all the way to Virginia. So it's been a lot. It's a lot of steps. So it also usually only relates to the prostitution charges, which again are very embarrassing, probably the most embarrassing. Not that drug convictions, stealing is not embarrassing, but I feel like you get a certain kind of response when people see that. It's not, I don't want to say it doesn't help, because it does. It opens the door for other opportunities to create a broader span of relief, but it doesn't help the right now, which is housing. Survivors can't get housing. They can't get any type of government assistance. They can't get custody back of their kids. And if they do, it's a million different stipulations. And it makes it really hard to reintegrate back into society successfully with these barriers. So hopefully, in hopes, the TSRA will hopefully make this more streamlined. Obviously, I know it's on a federal level, but it, like you said earlier, it will help the state kind of follow suit. These survivors with these prostitution charges also have X, Y, and Z on their record as well. It's very unusual to see a survivor with just a prostitution charge. They come with grand larceny. They come with possession of a weapon, kidnapping. It's huge, the amount of things that a trafficker can make a survivor do. So I feel like there's just this discord somewhere along the lines, and that's where I'm hopeful to come in, to be able to help other survivors be willing to do this process, to be able to show, yes, there's similarities here. There's a reason that these charges and these criminal records are need to be broader.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Liz, you're on the front lines, right? And you're hearing the frustrations that Olivia is talking about. You're seeing those frustrations, but a lot of times I think we sit back in our lane, whatever that might be, and we say, let somebody else solve the policy issue, right? You have recently stepped into this policy space. You have courageously put on that armor and stepped forward. Can you talk a little bit about your motivation there? Why is it important for legislators, for lawmakers, for those in the executive branch, whether it's at the local, state, or federal level, to hear about the work that you are doing? How does policy directly impact your ability to serve survivors with excellence?
The policy, the way survivors are treated, needs to change. We've had over 2,000 women come through our restorative care homes. We try to get housing. We try to help people get jobs. We've increased everything we do. When we started, it was just restorative care. And then people fell off a cliff because they couldn't get a job and they continually lost their kids. And then we had a girl commit suicide because she lost her kids. And it's heartbreaking. So every time there's been a problem, our response has been, what can we do to change it? So that's a good response in a limited way, but we can't do this by ourselves. The policy has to change. Law enforcement has to have a different understanding. The women who've come through my house, they're not criminals. They were victims overwhelmingly of abuse, usually as kids, trafficked as minors, and they end up with an average of about 11 felonies and misdemeanors combined. That's like a knockout punch for most people. Try getting a job in any place where you use a credit card if you have identity theft or grand larceny. You can't. And so we've done everything we can as a really tiny organization, small and mighty. We can't impact enough. So the policy has to change. The world has to wake up and see these women and victims of trafficking differently. We've had survivors at our house who were trafficked 18 years and nobody would take them. And we helped her get custody of one daughter and then her son. Her trafficker got 14 years. She was trafficked 18 years and left with felonies. And I sit there and go, where's the justice in that? She was punished longer than he got in jail. And we celebrated 14 years. That was a great case in Virginia. So it's upside down. The policy needs to change so that when we have a survivor come to our house and she's got Child Protective Services or the court saying you have 13 months to get your act together. You got to be sober. You got to be right. You got to be educated. You got to have a job and you got to have a house. Hopefully, and that's really hard for anybody, at least if they have Vegature and they don't have those records, and we can help them with their credit. We have financial literacy, plus we can help pay for rent. We'll go to someone and say, she's a win for you. And it's just changing people's hearts and changing their minds and understanding. Because the other issue really with survivors, I think, in safe houses like ours, they say, we have a house in Florida and we had a mom who's had 4 kids and they said, we have to come in and make sure nobody is a felon. And I'm like, so we had to build a wall and make a separate apartment for this mom to get custody of her kid. It's ludicrous. It's just changing. The policy would change so much. And if the states adopted, it would be, why should somebody have to lose their kids? Why should someone have to leave our safe house, not get a job, and then end up back in the lifestyle? We've had 3 women die in 11 years of fentanyl poisoning. We've had most overwhelmingly everyone in our house has lost their children. They've lost custody or their kids have been put in foster care. And it has to change. It absolutely has to change. So if everybody listening, what about calling our representatives? What if we put something online? Call the congressman, blow up their wonderful phones. Let's shut their phones down, calling up and demanding action. What if 100 million people called Congress and said, this? I mean, why not?
We're just going to take you and put you, we're going to put you in front of all the representatives with a cup of coffee and you just stare them down until they agree. So
but the policy has to change.
Yeah.
It has to change because every woman in our house who's been given opportunity and found safe housing, she never goes back to the lifestyle. And when she gets her children, it breaks the cycle of abuse. We do have something though that we're putting forward. It's called the Freedom Project. We are buying a property where moms and kids can live. They have money that goes into an escrow account. They'll be able to be homeowners. If they have felonies and they can't get the jobs they want, they're going to be entrepreneurs. And at the end of 5 years of trauma-informed wraparound support, they are going to be amazing contributors to society. And they are not going back. You give women that opportunity, they don't go back. But the society has to change. The policy has to change. It just has to.
And you hit on all those. I'm going to comment on that a second, but I want to give you all a second to think about your responses because we do have to wrap up. We're running out of time, but I always like to end on a positive note. And so I'd like each of you to give a message of hope, a message of encouragement. Liz, to those that are working in the service provision space, Meg, to prosecutors and law enforcement, to our police detectives and agents that are out there, and Olivia to survivors. So what you think about that for just a second, you raise a very good point, Liz, and we have got to be stronger advocates in this space. We have got to be able to fight and raise our voices, because representatives, elected officials, they're faced with 5 million priorities, right? And they need to hear from us, and they need to know that this is important to prioritize. Otherwise, it's other issues that are going to be in their faces all the time. And so we're here to support you. The first step, I believe, is joining these webinars and learning about the issues. As I mentioned, we'll be following up with an advocacy toolkit. We encourage you to join coalitions like the Trafficking Survivors Equity Coalition. If you need more information on any of these resources or where you can go, please feel free to reach out to us. We are here to support you in your advocacy efforts. Liz, I'm going to start with you. What's your message of hope and encouragement for those that are working in this space?
I would say somebody told us there's actually two things. The light in the darkness cannot be put out. Years ago, 100 years ago, they thought slavery would never end, but it did end because people stepped up and did something. And number two, one person cannot do it alone, but if we come together, it is going to change and it can happen. And I believe that. And number three, you said one thing, my one thing is three. These women are so worth investing in. You change one life, you change the world for future generations. You break this cycle. Everybody can make a difference. Everyone can make a difference.
Meg?
We probably should have ended with Liz because she's very inspiring. And I want to get a little technical with the law of what I see as positive about this. The legislation proposed has a lot of positives. And as Olivia mentioned, that will impact other states. That will set a model for other states to improve their own legislation, hopefully Virginia as well. And a few things to note just as we are in this conversation. This law does provide for vacatur or vacature, however you pronounce it, which is the highest level of relief. It clears it off the record as if it didn't exist. It also covers all nonviolent offenses, including felonies, which, for example, right now in Virginia, we only have 2 misdemeanors that can be vacated. And so that's a positive about this legislation, the offenses covered. And the evidence presented can be just an affidavit, a sworn affidavit, or additional evidence. There's no specific checklist that a survivor has to submit. And so there is discretion for the person submitting the petition and discretion for the judge as well. So there's some good things about this legislation that as we're in the dialogue, as we contact our representatives to know specific points that we're in support of. And just with federal legislation, there's just more awareness. And so I'm hopeful that as there is momentum and we get to join and continue with the momentum of contacting representatives, that with this momentum, there's awareness in the court systems that this is even an issue. It shifts the picture of what we have for trafficking to realize in many cases, these are Americans who have been trafficked. There's relief for immigrants as well on different visas. But even just broadening our horizons, as Olivia said, of what this looks like, this is education. As the law is passed, this is court legal-wide education and community-wide education about what is needed and what's really happening in our communities. And just one piece of advice, if there are legal practitioners, as we submit these petitions, your first priority is to your client, but also every single petition is also an opportunity to educate of what trafficking looks like. And so as you submit to the court, not just doing the bare minimum, but there's collaboration needed across jurisdictions, and also seeing these petitions, they're going to be read by attorneys and read by judges, and every single petition can help educate within the legal system.
Awesome. And Olivia, I want to honor you by giving you the last word. What do you say to survivors?
I know that for me personally, it's a hard thing to discuss anyways, but I always feel like the reason why I do this is because for so long I didn't think that anybody was listening or could hear me, that I was just absolutely voiceless. So I do this and advocate for other survivors so that they can feel the same way I felt when someone finally listened to me and heard my voice. So even though you feel like you don't have a voice now, if you just use it, someone eventually will listen for sure. And I'm obviously, to any survivor that has anything to do with anything, vacature, expungement, any type of support, advocacy, I'm here. And there probably isn't much they could tell me that I haven't experienced or been through, and that someday we'll get where we need to be for all survivors.
Amazing. Thank you to the amazing panelists for all the work that you're doing in the field. It is incredible. You are all unsung heroes in my book. And thank you to all of you for being on here. Hopefully, this is just the beginning of this conversation. It is an ongoing conversation. Once we get the TSRA passed, I'm sure there'll be additional advocacy to improve and strengthen its efforts. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. You all are amazing. And we'll see you next month.